Welcome to your headquarters for knowledge and helpful advice on a variety of topics, all from trusted experts in their fields. It's time for River City Podcast. Chris Wheless is a certified strength and conditioning specialist in the National Strength and Conditioning Association. He has over 2 decades of experience training athletes of all different levels, as well as the general population, including seniors and youth. He got his undergraduate degree in exercise science from VCU and then attended UVA as a professional development student in exercise physiology. Chris is the owner of AdventureFit, an organization that blends outdoor adventure-type activities with traditional strength and conditioning with the ultimate goal of helping people achieve and maintain a healthy lifestyle. Chris's guest today is Ben Klingelhofer. Ben is a physical therapist and the owner of Bend Movement Physical Therapy. In over 5 years of practice, Ben has continued to grow and hone his clinical skills in order to get the best possible outcomes for all of his patients. He currently works with a wide range of patients who all share one common trait, the desire to move and feel their best. Ben provides individualized care to each and every client to get them out of pain and back into achieving their movement goals. So welcome, Chris and Ben, to River City Podcast.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Chris, let's start with you. You started AdventureFit. Tell us a little bit about that first.
I have a background in strength and conditioning, and I'm a strength and conditioning specialist in the National Strength and Conditioning Association. But I also love the mountains. I love the Rocky Mountains. I like to fish high mountain lakes. I like to hunt elk. I like to backpack. I like to mountain bike, do all those things that take you into the mountains. And so what I began to see over the years is a lot of the weekend warriors, so to speak, that like to do those things as well. They go on these adventures, and I like to call them adventures, and that's where the name AdventureFit comes from. But they go on these adventures without having spent enough time conditioning themselves. And so what they end up doing is they get so focused on the gear. So they're focused on what backpack they're going to use, what boots they're going to take, what fishing reel, what lures. And then they get about maybe a month out from their trip and they realize, I'm not in very good shape. What should I do? How can I do this? And so they're behind the 8 ball from there. So I just saw an opportunity to be able to help people with that using my background in strength and conditioning.
And something that you absolutely love.
Correct. I have a passion for it.
That's perfect. Let's get into the mountain athlete.
Yeah, so that's a term that I like to use. And it's important to understand that we're not talking about professional athletes here. So we're not talking about an ultra endurance mountain runner or a professional snowshoer or mountain biker. We're talking about, like I mentioned earlier, the weekend warrior. And those are the ones that need the help that I can give them.
Yeah, I don't know if you know that I spent every summer in Montana, but one of the things that my dad actually did was he was a police officer, but he did the helicopter rescue for all the people that came with all their brand new stuff to go climb the mountains without having been properly trained and thus needed to be rescued by a helicopter unit.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting you say that. And, you know, I did an experiment this time. I just got back from Western Colorado earlier this week. And for about 2 months before I went out, I stopped training my lower body. So there were no exercises for strength. There were no squats, no lunges, no leg presses, no isometrics, nothing like that. And the reason I did that is I wanted to experiment and see if I could feel myself, perhaps what somebody would be feeling that was in the same boat, that wasn't into fitness and wasn't taking care of themselves. And so I noticed that after one hike, I got sore. And that had never happened to me before. I was sore from my Achilles tendon all the way up the posterior chain into the glutes and the hips. And so that kind of gave me a different perspective on what someone may be feeling, these weekend warriors that attempt these adventures.
What is the ideal time that you would like to have with them in a perfect world to get them fully ready? Like how, weeks, months?
6 months if they're not what I call a gym rat. If they're spending maybe 90 minutes a week in the gym sporadically, then if I have 6 months, I can typically get them to a level of conditioning where they're going to get more benefit and more enjoyment out of their activity.
Nice. Good to know. Okay. So we're not talking about a lap at the mall. We're talking about pretty serious weekend activities. So let's talk a little bit about injury prevention and how that plays into things.
Yeah, I think that's key, and Ben's going to touch on that a little bit more. But if you go from a sedentary or relatively sedentary way of life, and then you fly to the Rockies, then you've got several challenges in front of you. You've got altitude, and then you have your state of deconditioning. And taking your body or your muscle groups from a relative position of inactivity to higher activity, which is sustained over 5 days or more, because you're basically talking up a hill, down a hill, up a hill, down a hill constantly. And so Ben can touch on a little bit on that as to what someone in that position would be looking at as far as potential injuries and mitigation of those injuries.
When we're looking at general injuries, an injury is when what you demand of your body exceeds what your body is capable of handling. So there's a couple ways you can talk about mitigating injuries. Way number one is just stay below what your threshold is. Don't ever do anything that's going to challenge or really tax your body beyond what it's capable of. Option number two, which is more where you're leaning in, is to train up the body's capacity to be able to handle more. Build up your strength, build up your aerobic capacity, build up your coordination to a point where even if you do stumble, trip, or fall, even if you do get fatigued, your body is not exceeding its threshold of what it's capable of handling, and thus you're not actually going to injure an area. There are more specific areas, especially with mountain activities, that you likely want to focus on. Typically, the lower body is going to be a bit more involved in hiking, in rucking, in climbing, and that you have to use your legs to propel yourself up the mountain. You have to use your legs to control your descent. Your arm's going to be involved in some capacity, but typically if we're looking at injury prevention, we're going to want to focus on the area that you're going to be using the most, which is going to be the lower body.
That makes perfect sense. The arms are just kind of there in case you get off balance or need to navigate around something.
And trekking poles are pretty common these days as well. And so there's a whole set of exercises that we do using trekking poles in addition to the lower body, as has been mentioned.
Chris, when you're training people to get ready for these type of activities, are you primarily training them in that kind of environment outdoors?
I wish I could do that all the time. That is what I suggest. But if you don't live in a mountainous area, then you're going to have to get creative with your training. There's a concept called specificity of movement. And basically what that is looking at the movement that particular athlete will be doing while engaging in that activity or sport. And then you try to replicate that activity, perhaps under load or by changing certain variables such as intensity or time under tension. But oftentimes you have to get creative. And an example of that would be somebody living on the East Coast that is planning a trip to the Rockies for perhaps photographing elk during the rut. Well, we don't live in the Rockies. We don't have those steep drainages. So we have to get creative with our training, try to address those muscle groups in that plane of motion, whether it's the sagittal, transverse, or coronal plane, or ideally a combination of all those planes. But we get as close to the actual activity or mimicking the activity as we can get in our controlled environment, whether that be the gym or whether that be outside with some creative utilization of ideas that we've come up with to help them.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And guys, posture plays a huge role in all of this when someone's doing these activities and with what I would assume is a really heavy pack. How does that play a role in ensuring that you stay physically safe?
Posture is a fancy word for your body's position, and different postures are required for different activities. There's an optimal posture or position for standing up straight, for walking, for hiking. When we are incorporating an external load like a backpack or other equipment, the demand on your posture changes some. Your weight is distributed slightly differently than it would be if you were just standing there without any equipment or anything like that. If you're doing an activity that's going to be prolonged or that's going to be pushing you to your limit, you want to be as efficient with that movement or with that activity as possible. And that's really where posture comes in and becomes more important. If it's more efficient to hold yourself in a certain position as you're climbing, as you're hiking, as you're walking, it's going to allow you to do more of that with less injury risk and with less energy drained from doing that activity. If you're in a worse posture, if you're performing the same movement pattern but less efficiently, your capacity and your ability to do that, especially over the long run, is going to go down over time.
Yeah. Chris, when you're training, are you emulating to the point where people are actually at some point putting those packs on while they're training with you to get comfortable with being in the right posture and having that load?
Absolutely. It depends on the phase of the routine. So I periodize the training program. And so once we're about maybe 3 weeks in, then we start to add weight in the pack. And it's important, like Ben was saying, posture, because if your backpack is heavy, then your hips are going to be supporting it. And you have a tendency to lean forward. And so you kind of have to do that to keep yourself from falling backwards. So having a strong, I want to use the term core, but core is very dependent on who you talk to as to what it is. Some people have the definition of core being from your knees up to your solar plexus. Others would say just from your hip to your solar plexus. So when I use the term core, I'm talking about from my knee up to my solar plexus. Think about if you've got strong legs, a strong upper body, and a marshmallow connecting the two. Then you're going to have a difficult time generating the force or transferring the force that you are producing with each stride through that marshmallow into the upper body. So you have to have the musculature, the rectus abdominis and the obliques and the lower back and all of those muscles that make up that part of the core. They have to be able to generate the force or transfer the force from the stride through the body to propel you forward, or else you're going to lose some force and you're not going to be as efficient. You're also going to be setting yourself up for potentially more injuries. That's where proper posture, as Ben was mentioning, comes into play. So yes, we do add the pack at the right time if we have enough time.
And I'm imagining that some people probably come to you desperate more at the last minute. What can you do? I don't have that long.
That's the majority.
Right.
That's the majority. And they're usually carrying a little bit more body fat than they would like. And one of the benefits of a conditioning program is weight loss is going to be a byproduct. And you may put on a little bit of lean tissue as well.
Well, that's a great outcome. For sure. I love the fact that you guys have teamed up because it is so connected. And Ben, you have a really interesting model for your business and how you're doing physical therapy. Can you just share a little bit about your practice and what's making it kind of unique?
I am offering directly one-on-one visits with each and every single one of my clients. Where that differs from a typical physical therapy practice is that because I can see patients in a more one-on-one model, we can more directly address their goals, their needs, and be more specific with what their treatment is. Just like Chris was describing the specific demands of each exercise, each treatment is also going to have certain specifics that we can get the most out of it for that particular patient or client by focusing on those things. At Bend Movement, we really like to take a more active approach to rehabilitation. We don't just want people to lay on a table and get a massage. We want to actually demand more out of their bodies, to actually build strength, build mobility. This is going to create a more lasting change for the long term to help them continue to meet their goals and not experience as many setbacks along the way.
I say do that, but then also lay on the table and get the massage.
I mean, everybody gets a massage here and there too. It definitely is important with buy-in and for symptom management.
So, and I hate to say it, I mean, Chris, you're doing a phenomenal job training these people and getting them ready. But in the worst case scenario, if they do end up having an issue when they get back to Richmond, now they know they have Ben to help correct whatever maybe went wrong or unexpected. So that's awesome too.
There's always a good relationship between the strength coach and the physical therapist. It's like it goes hand in hand.
That's awesome. Chris, tell us a little bit more about how altitude plays a role.
Yeah, so altitude is one of the big challenges or the big hurdles for somebody coming from an area like the East Coast. We have mountains here, but they're not really tall enough that you're going to notice a dramatic effect in how you feel when you go up there. So if you can think about this, if you're standing at sea level, then you have the entire atmosphere above you on your head and on your shoulders. And so that's atmospheric pressure. Now, as you go up in the atmosphere, that pressure gets less because let's say you drive up to the trailhead at 8,000 feet, you get out of your vehicle. Well, now you have the atmosphere on your head and shoulders, but it's less of the atmosphere. So as that atmospheric pressure goes down, it affects oxygen saturation. Some people have the incorrect idea or belief that the amount of oxygen in the atmosphere changes as you go up, but it doesn't. It's 21.2% roughly, whether you're at sea level or whether you're at 10 or 11,000 feet. What does change is the atmospheric pressure. That atmospheric pressure is related to oxygen saturation. So basically what that means is the amount of oxygen that goes from the lung tissue into the blood is less as the atmospheric pressure is less. So that triggers a cascade of events that goes all the way to the mitochondria of the cell, which is the final destination of oxygen. So you may get a headache. You may notice an increased heart rate. Perhaps you notice those involuntary gasps for breath. Last week I was sitting up at the cafe and we were at around 10,000 feet and I had to take a deep breath. I wasn't doing anything, but that's because we had just driven from 6,000 feet up to that elevation. And it takes 1 to 3 days for your body to begin to adjust. It takes up to 28 days for your body to fully adjust from a performance standpoint. So this is kind of what it looks like. At 6,000 feet, you're talking about 3 weeks to fully adjust.
Wow.
If you go to 14,000 feet, you're talking 7 weeks to fully adjust. So you can see where somebody coming from sea level going up to altitude like that, especially if they're not in the best shape to begin with, that's going to be a challenge for them.
Well, and so you obviously aren't taking people on airplanes to higher altitudes when you're training. So how do you compensate for that in your training and what you're doing with people to get them ready for it?
That's a great question. There's really no way to do it. The best thing you can do is to get your fitness level up and become as fit as you can be before your trip. Now, there is one hack that seems to help a little bit, and that is wearing a mask while you're working out. Now, what that does is it helps to simulate the discomfort that you would experience while you're engaging in activity at altitude and you're gasping for breath. That's what the mask sometimes can do.
And Chris, for anyone looking to get involved with AdventureFit, tell them the best way to find you.
The best way to find us is AdventureFit on YouTube. You'll see a series of gear reviews with training programs coming soon and on Patreon.
And your contact information.
It's on there as well.
Okay, great. And Ben, same question for you. For anyone that is looking to get into doing some physical therapy for Bend Movement, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Best way to reach out would be on my website, which is bendmvmt.com. If you go to the contact page, you'll be able to set up a free discovery call. I'm also on all social media platforms at bendmvmt on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube.
Okay, you're doing all the things. And I'll have all the links for how to find Chris and Ben in the body of this podcast too. So it'll just be a simple click to find them. And Chris and Ben, thank you so much for being on River City Podcast.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to River City Podcast. If you're interested in setting up a podcast for your business, go to rivercityconsulting.com.